Welcome back, survivors, scavengers, and fellow enthusiasts of not starving to death. Today we're talking about something beautiful, something miraculous, something that's been sitting underground for years, possibly decades, just waiting for you to dig it up and give it a second chance at life. Seeds, those tiny little time capsules of botanical hope that your ancestors buried, forgot about, or simply never got around to planting before everything went sideways. And here's the incredible part. Seeds are basically nature's USB drives. They store genetic information in a dormant state, protected by tough outer coatings, sometimes for an absolutely absurd amount of time. Scientists have germinated date palm seeds that were 2,000 years old. 2,000 years. That seed was chilling in a jar, while empires rose and fell, and then some researcher added water, and boom, green sprout. Zero complaints. Now, your buried seed stash probably isn't quite that ancient, but the principle holds. Seeds evolved to survive harsh conditions, drought, cold, being eaten, and, shall we say, deposited elsewhere. They're designed to wait. And in a world where the grocery store has become a haunted relic of the before times, that patience is about to pay off. So grab your rusted trowel, dust off that mysterious container you found in what used to be someone's garden shed, and let's talk about turning forgotten seeds into actual food. Alright, so you've got a handful of seeds. Maybe they were in a labeled packet. Maybe they were loose in a jar. Maybe they were in some kind of suspicious bundle wrapped in plastic that you found buried under a collapsed greenhouse. Doesn't matter. What matters is figuring out which of these little guys still have the spark of life in them. First, let's talk about visual inspection. You want seeds that look like they were meant to look. If you've got bean seeds, they should be smooth, firm, and relatively uniform in color. If you've got sunflower seeds, they should have that classic striped shell without any weird discoloration or fuzzy patches. Fuzzy patches are bad. Fuzzy patches mean mold has moved in, and mold is not your friend in this scenario. Size matters here, but not in the way you might think. You're not looking for the biggest seeds necessarily. You're looking for seeds that are plump and full rather than shriveled and sad. A shriveled seed has lost moisture over time, and while some can still germinate, your odds go way down. Think of it like this. You want seeds that look like they've been napping comfortably, not seeds that look like they've been through a dehydrator. Now, the squeeze test. For larger seeds like beans, peas, or squash seeds, you can gently squeeze them between your fingers. A viable seed will feel solid, maybe with just a tiny bit of give. A dead seed will feel hollow, or it'll just crumble. If it crumbles, congratulations, you've just made very disappointing confetti. Shell hardness is another indicator. Seeds with hard outer coatings, like morning glories or some legumes, are actually more likely to survive long storage because that shell is armor. It keeps moisture out and keeps the embryo protected. If that shell is cracked or compromised, though, water and bacteria have had a chance to get in and cause problems. Here's a classic test that actually works, the float test. Drop your seeds in a container of water and wait about 15 minutes. Seeds that sink are generally denser and more likely to be viable. Seeds that float are often hollow or damaged inside. It's not a perfect test. Some perfectly good seeds float, but it's a decent first filter when you're working with a large batch and limited patience. And finally, trust your nose. Seeds should smell like seeds, which is to say, not much of anything. Maybe a faint, earthy, or nutty smell, depending on the type. If they smell musty, sour, or like something died in the container, that's decay. Those seeds have left us. We thank them for their service. So you've sorted the hopeful from the hopeless, and now you've got a pile of potentially viable seeds. Excellent. But here's the thing. Some seeds are stubborn. They've been dormant for so long that they've basically forgotten how to wake up. They need a little encouragement. Sometimes they need a lot of encouragement. Some of them need you to basically simulate an entire seasonal cycle before they'll deign to sprout. Let's start with the simplest technique. Soaking. Most seeds benefit from being soaked in water for anywhere from a few hours to overnight. This softens the seed coat and signals to the embryo inside that, hey, conditions are wet, maybe it's time to do something. Room temperature water works fine. You don't need to heat it, unless you're dealing with particularly tough seeds, in which case warm water, not boiling, just comfortably warm, can speed things up. For seeds with really hard coats, we move on to scorification, which sounds violent because it kind of is. Scorification means physically damaging the seed coat just enough to let water in. You can do this by rubbing seeds gently against a rough surface, like a rock or a piece of broken concrete. You can nick the seed coat with a knife, very carefully, just breaking through the outer layer without damaging the embryo inside. Some people use sandpaper if they have it. The goal is controlled damage. You're not trying to pulverize the seed, you're just giving water a way in. Now, temperature matters more than you might think. Most seeds germinate best in warm conditions, somewhere between 65 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. In a collapsed world without thermometers, you're basically aiming for comfortable for humans temperature. If you're not shivering and you're not sweating, the seeds are probably fine. Some seeds actually need cold treatment first, a process called stratification. This mimics winter, telling the seed that it's been through the cold season and spring is coming. If you suspect you're dealing with seeds from temperate climates, fruit trees, certain wildflowers, perennials, you might need to keep them cold and damp for a few weeks before trying to germinate them. A buried container in a shaded spot can work for this. You're recreating winter in miniature. Moisture control is the tricky balance. Seeds need moisture to germinate, but they also need oxygen. If you drown them, they'll rot. If you let them dry out after they've started the germination process, they'll die. Think damp, not soaked. Think wrung-out sponge, not swimming pool. In the utopian past, you could walk into a garden center and buy adorable little seed-starting trays with clear plastic domes and built-in drainage holes. Those days are gone. Now we improvise. Now we get creative. Now we look at garbage and see potential. Anything that can hold soil and has drainage can be a seed-starting container. Old cans with holes punched in the bottom, broken mugs. The bottom halves of plastic bottles. Take out containers that somehow survived the apocalypse better than most of civilization. Shoes, if you're really desperate. I'm not here to judge. The key features you need are these. The container should hold enough soil for roots to develop, usually at least 2 to 3 inches deep. It needs drainage holes so excess water can escape. And it should be clean enough that you're not introducing a bunch of pathogens right next to your vulnerable baby seeds. If you've got nothing that works as a container, you can dig small pits directly in the ground and use those. This is called direct sowing, and honestly, it's what humans did for thousands of years before container gardening became trendy. Dig a small depression, add your seeds, cover lightly with soil, and let nature do its thing. The downside is less control over moisture and temperature, and more exposure to pests and curious animals who will absolutely dig up your seeds just to see what you're up to. Soil is its own challenge. Good germination mix is light and fluffy, holds moisture without getting waterlogged, and doesn't have big chunks that seeds have to fight through. If you've found commercial potting soil, great, use that. If not, you're looking for fine-textured soil, maybe mixed with some sand or crushed charcoal to improve drainage. Avoid heavy clay if you can. Seeds will struggle to push through it, and it holds water like a grudge. You can also use things that aren't technically soil. Coconut coir if you find some, peat moss, though that's increasingly rare. Even damp cloth or paper can work for the initial sprouting phase, though you'll need to transfer to real soil once roots appear. Alright, you've got your seeds, you've prepped them, you've got containers with drainage and something resembling soil. Now comes the part where you put seed in dirt and add water. Simple, right? Wrong. This is where dreams go to die if you're not careful. Planting depth is important. The general rule is to plant seeds at a depth roughly 2 to 3 times their diameter. Tiny seeds get barely covered. Larger seeds go deeper. This isn't just tradition, it's physics. Seeds have limited energy reserves, and they need to be able to push their sprouts up through the soil to reach light before those reserves run out. Plant too deep, and they'll exhaust themselves trying to reach the surface. Some seeds need light to germinate and shouldn't be covered at all, just pressed gently into the surface of the soil. Lettuce is like this, so are some herbs. If you're not sure, plant half your seeds shallow and half a bit deeper. Science through trial and error. Now, watering. This is where people mess up more than anywhere else. The instinct when you're desperate for food is to helicopter parent those seeds. Check on them every hour. Add more water because they look dry. Poke at the soil to see if anything's happening yet. Stop it. Step away from the seeds. Overwatering is the #1 killer of germinating seeds, more than drought, more than cold, more than hungry rodents. When soil is constantly waterlogged, it cuts off oxygen to the roots and creates perfect conditions for fungal diseases that will turn your potential food source into a science experiment in decay. Water when the top of the soil feels dry to the touch. Water gently so you don't blast seeds out of position or compact the soil. Water thoroughly enough that moisture reaches the bottom of the container. Then walk away. Come back tomorrow, maybe the day after. Conversely, letting seeds dry out completely after germination has begun is equally fatal. Once that seed coat cracks open and the embryo starts growing, it needs consistent moisture. It's committed. It can't go back to dormancy. So the balance you're aiming for is damp but not soaked, consistent but not obsessive. Think of yourself as a thoughtful friend rather than a smothering parent. Check in regularly, provide support when needed, but give those seeds space to do their thing. In a perfect world, you'd have a greenhouse with climate control, grow lights on timers, and maybe some gentle background music to encourage photosynthesis. We don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world where ideal conditions are whatever you can cobble together from available materials and stubbornness. Sunlight is your most important resource, and also your most available one, assuming you're not living in some kind of underground bunker situation. Seeds don't need light to germinate, but the moment those first leaves appear, they need it desperately. Position your containers where they'll get at least 6 hours of direct sunlight, more if possible. If direct sunlight is limited, you can use reflective surfaces to redirect and concentrate what's available. Sheets of metal, pieces of mirror, even aluminum foil smoothed over cardboard. Position these around your growing area to bounce light onto your seedlings from multiple angles. It's not as good as a proper south-facing window, but it helps. Warmth is trickier because it requires energy, and energy is precious. But there are passive ways to capture and retain heat. Dark-colored containers absorb more solar energy than light ones. Surrounding your seed area with rocks or bricks that warm up during the day and release heat slowly at night can moderate temperature swings. Even positioning containers against a south-facing wall that's been absorbing sun all day can give you a few extra degrees. If you've got access to decomposing organic matter, congratulations, you've got a heat source. Compost generates heat as it breaks down, sometimes quite a lot of it. Burying containers partway in an active compost pile, or building a makeshift hotbed with layers of fresh manure or green waste can keep your seeds warm, even in cool weather. This is old technology, used for centuries before anyone invented the thermostat. Humidity matters too, especially in the early stages. You can create a miniature greenhouse effect by covering containers with clear plastic, glass from picture frames, or even just propping something transparent over them. This traps moisture and warmth together. Just remember to ventilate occasionally so you don't create a fungal paradise. And now we enter the hardest phase of all: waiting, staring at dirt, talking to dirt, threatening dirt, making promises to dirt about what you'll do if it just shows you one tiny green sprout. Just one, please, you're begging here. Different seeds take different amounts of time to germinate. Some, like lettuce or radishes, can pop up in 3 to 5 days if conditions are right. Others, like peppers or tomatoes, might take 2 weeks. Trees and perennials can take months. Without knowing exactly what seeds you're working with, you're playing a guessing game with your hopes. Day 1, you plant. Day 2, you water lightly and check for any signs of activity. There are none, obviously. Day 3, same thing. Day 4, you convince yourself you see the soil moving slightly. You don't. It's wishful thinking. Day 5, you debate whether you overwatered or underwatered, or planted too deep or not deep enough. Day 6, nothing. Day 7, definitely nothing. And you're starting to wonder if maybe those seeds were dead after all. If maybe you did all this work for nothing. If maybe you should have just eaten something else. If maybe the entire concept of hope is just a cruel trick the universe plays on survivors. Day 8, you wake up, shuffle over to your seed containers with the defeated energy of someone who's been hurt before. And they're pushing up through the soil, a pale green loop of stem, unfurling like a tiny fist opening toward the sun. And suddenly, everything is different. Suddenly, you're not just surviving, you're cultivating. You're participating in an unbroken chain of agriculture stretching back 10,000 years. You're growing food, actual food, from seeds that were written off as forgotten in containers made of garbage, in a world that tried its best to end all of this. You will become unreasonably attached to that sprout. You will check on it constantly. You will narrate its progress out loud to no one. This is normal, This is healthy. That sprout represents something bigger than itself, and you're allowed to feel things about it. Let's bring this home with what actually matters, the lessons you can carry forward from this exercise in botanical resurrection. First, patience is not optional. Seeds operate on their own timeline, not yours. You cannot rush germination through willpower or positive thinking or aggressive watering. You can only create good conditions and then wait. This is true of most things worth doing. Second, improvisation is the whole game now. The specific instructions in old gardening books assumed you had access to supplies that may no longer exist. What you do have is creativity, observation, and the ability to look at random objects and think about what else they could be. A broken pot is a planter. A piece of glass is a greenhouse roof. Your enemy is rigid thinking, not lack of resources. Third, observation beats intervention. Your job is to watch, learn, and adjust, not to constantly tinker. Every time you mess with your seeds, you risk disturbing something. Check conditions, note what's working and what isn't. Make minimal, targeted changes. The seeds know how to grow. You're just creating space for that to happen. Fourth, failure is information. Not every seed will germinate. Not every sprout will survive. Some of your experiments will fail completely, and that's fine. That's actually valuable, because now you know one way that doesn't work. The survivors who thrive long-term are the ones who treat failure as data rather than defeat. And fifth, those seeds were waiting for you. Maybe they were buried by someone who never got to plant them. Maybe they were lost in a shed that collapsed. Maybe they were forgotten in a basement for decades. They persisted through all of it, carrying genetic instructions for turning sunlight and water into food, just waiting for conditions to be right. You are those conditions. You, with your determination and your improvised containers and your willingness to stare at dirt for days on end, hoping for a miracle. Go find some seeds, prepare them with whatever you've got, plant them in whatever will hold soil, water them carefully, wait. And when that first sprout emerges, remember, you're not just feeding yourself, you're continuing a tradition as old as civilization itself. You're proving that, even in a ruined world, life finds a way, usually with your help. If you're still out there, keep digging, keep planting, keep watching for green. Until next time, survivors.